Hello everybody and welcome back to Sparkling Autos. It's been a few weeks since my last video, but I'm back with something a little bit different and perhaps even a little bit special this week. Back in April of this year I was contacted by Garage Therapy and asked if I would be interested in testing their new development, Snowfoam, which was something I was very honoured and privileged to be asked, given that at the time my own channel had only been going for about 6 months. So since then, at various stages of the development, both myself and my friend Graeme from GM Details have been testing the different versions of this product. And in this video I'm going to briefly look at some of those earlier versions and explain what was maybe good and maybe not so good about them, and then show the latest version I received a couple of weeks ago. Show it being tested at different dilution ratios on cars with different levels of protection, etc. And then we'll have a look and see how I feel about the product overall. Obviously this isn't technically a product review, as this isn't the final version of the product, but to the best of my knowledge, from various discussions I've had with Maz from Garage Therapy, this is as close to the final product as we're going to get pre-release. So before we delve too far into the video, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel and press the bell button for notifications of future videos. It's just one free way that you can support the channel going forward. So as I said, we'll start off by looking at the earlier versions of the products. Well, as I received them anyway, which I labelled 1A and 1B. Now these weren't the official titles given to these products by Garage Therapy, this is just what I called them for my own sanity, so that I knew what I was talking about when I was taking notes. And version 2 that you can see here is actually the latest one I received, so we're going to come back to that a bit later on. I should mention that one thing you'll notice throughout the video is that I give the dilution ratios both in PIR and in mils per litre. Now if you don't know what PIR is, that's panel impact ratio. Basically what percentage of what's landing on the car is the actual product versus the water that it's mixed with. The only reason I'm even bringing this up is I know a lot of people don't like to work in PIR, which I can understand. It can be complicated to work out. They don't really see the benefit to it for day-to-day maintenance cleaning, which probably is true. You know, you might start with 100ml and you'll work up and down from there based on your experience. But what's important to note here is when you're actually testing the products out, and during these tests I was using different machinery, different lances, you want to remove that variable from it. So you know you're using the same amount of chemical and you're only getting different results based on different machinery. But enough waffling about PIR. If you are interested in finding out more and you want to know a quick way to calculate it, I've made a 4-minute video and I've put a link below. But I'm waffling again, so back to the test in hand. Now the footage you've been looking at while I was talking there has actually been sped up around 16 times, so basically this has been on now for approaching 10 minutes. Now this was applied using the Karcher K4, that'll become relevant in a few minutes. And you'll see it went on easily, it was a good consistent foam, and as you'll see in the next couple of minutes it rinses off very easily. Cleaning part will come to in a minute. So the first thing that struck me about this particular version was that dwell time. Now it wasn't a particularly warm day, it was quite early in the morning and the temperature I noted down at the time was 14 degrees. But it was in direct sunlight and I could have easily left this on for, as you can see, probably another 10 minutes and it wouldn't have dried in. Now, generally speaking, when you get a foam that dwells like that, it can be a nightmare to rinse off, or at least when you do rinse it off, it's sitting on your driveway or on the street for another 2 or 3 days afterwards. But that wasn't the case here. As you can see looking at the ground, it's pretty much disappearing as I'm rinsing it off the car. So we'll finish rinsing it off and we'll move on to the next part of the test. So ignoring what it says on the screen here, this is still version 1A, it's still the same foam, only this time we've increased the dilution ratio. As you can see, I'm applying it with the Karcher K2. And the reasoning behind this particular part of the test was just to see how high can you go in your dilutions when you're using the lower output machines that a lot of people would use for their regular maintenance washes. And as you can probably see from these images, despite the poor brightness levels, there is an immediate issue. Basically when used on the smaller machine, the foam was almost too thick for its own good. It came out, there was a lot of basically there was too much air in the foam. The problem with that being, although it looks thick and creamy, it's actually reducing the contact surface on the vehicle. So there's a lot of bubbles. As you can see, it falls off a lot quicker. Now it still did dwell, it still dwelled quite a few minutes, but it's not having the same effect that it would have even at a lower dilution ratio with the bigger machine. Now by that I don't mean that people should then go out and buy more powerful output machines. I mean that for the general domestic user and the machines that people use day to day or week to week, this foam at this dilution ratio wasn't perhaps ideal. Now the cleaning power, as you'll see in a few seconds, was absolutely outstanding, as good as any I've ever used. But there were a few other issues with this product that Maz later explained to me, particularly regarding the ingredients. Now I'm not a chemist, so I don't want to go into it too much, but it wasn't non-caustic, there were no rust inhibitors in it. And one thing we both agreed on was that the smell was just awful. There's no other way to describe it, it smelled like urine. But we'll look at that cleaning power and then we'll move on to the next version. So as you can see in this little bit of footage, as I bring my finger in to allow the camera to focus, that the cleaning power is second to none. This was completely contactless, there's been nothing else done here, just this product applied and rinsed off. And whilst there's no such thing as a completely contactless wash, if you were stuck for time and only had a few minutes, this would definitely have done the job to get the car clean and respectable enough to drive around in. Moving on then to version 1B, as I like to call it, and of the two products I did receive back in April, this is the one which more closely resembles the most recent version I was testing. Now by that I don't mean this is the final product or is in any way going to resemble the final product, I'm just saying that of those two, this is a closer match. And what can we tell looking at this one? Well, as you can see, when it's actually applied it does go on with a good consistency, but unlike the first version, if you look at the front wing and even the bonnet, you can see that the product's already starting to fall off. The dwell time certainly isn't there in comparison to the first one. In fact, even just speeding this up slightly, within 2 or 3 minutes the products actually started to fall off the vehicle quite rapidly. And that was despite the fact that there was no direct sunlight here and the conditions were even cooler than the previous test. I did however want to see exactly what it was capable of, so I allowed it to dwell for 5 minutes regardless. 1, to see how easy it was to remove, and 2, just to see if the cleaning power was on a level with the first sample. You can see how easy it's coming off. The car is clean underneath and even the protection on the car hasn't been affected by this at all. So when I finished rinsing this one off then, I decided to do a direct 50-50 comparison between the two at the same ratio on the same car at the same time. Let's take a look at that one. I should point out here that this is purely for informational purposes. Both of the samples I'm using were developed at the tail end of this process, but for me personally, having never been involved in anything like this before, I just found it interesting to do a comparison between the two. And I was taking the footage anyway, and I just thought I would include it because, well, I think it's interesting. I'm not reviewing these earlier versions as, to be honest, they're never going to be in production. In fact, what I have here is probably the last remnants of it there's going to be. But this process has given me an appreciation for the amount of time, effort and indeed money that goes into developing these products, and I think it's something we don't really appreciate enough as consumers. And this little bit of behind the scenes glimpse into what actually goes on might actually help us appreciate that a bit more, I think. I know it certainly has for me. Back to this little comparison anyway. So what you won't have noticed behind the camera there, after I'd applied the left hand side, I actually went and rinsed the lance out and filled it with the pre-made mixture I had. And this is all filmed in one shot, so as you can see looking at the left hand side, that is still dwelling as if it was applied 30 seconds ago. Whereas on the right hand side, I've reached the back of the car and the stuff at the front is already starting to fall off. So let's skip forward another 5 minutes and see what they look like then. So as you can see here, just as earlier in the video, the 1B certainly didn't dwell anywhere near the length of time that the 1A did. But one thing I can tell you from having done extensive testing in both of these versions was that the cleaning power was excellent for both. There are absolutely no issues with it whatsoever. And again, without getting into too much detail, partly because I'm not a chemist so I'm not qualified to, but knowing what went into making these two products, the one on the right hand side, the 1B, would be the one that you would want to use more regularly as a maintenance product. It contained rust inhibitors, other non-caustic ingredients, and generally speaking was much more suitable as a regular maintenance snow foam. So after a few brief discussions with Maz, where I basically confirmed with my testing what he had already knew about the product, he and Roger then knew what direction they wanted to take this product, and a couple of months later they came back to me with the next version of the product, and that's what we're going to take a look at now. So as you'll see from these shots here, I had 3 different cars that I wanted to test this on. The first one being the Audi A6, you may remember from previous videos, but just a reminder that back in April it got 2 coats of the Garage Therapy ceramic sealant, followed a week later by another 2 coats of the Garage Therapy Sigma. And since then the car's owner has been cleaning the car regularly with Garage Therapy maintenance products, including topping it up with the Garage Therapy QD. And with that in mind, I wanted to see just how well this new Snowfoam would clean that car at a very low dilution ratio. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And for the second part of the test, which will be carried out using the Karcher K2, I'm using this Mercedes A-Class, which all I know is hasn't been cleaned for a couple of months and has some sort of dealer applied protection on it. And the final car you'll see here is my mother-in-law's little Peugeot 108. Now this car is suffering from a condition that I like to call auto lockdownitis. Basically it has sat around for the last year and a half, it hasn't moved, it certainly hasn't been washed, and it's just had all manner of bugs, insects and spiders making a hotel of it and just settling down for a place to live. Added to that, it's been sitting outside in all weathers in a coastal area, so it's had salt water, rain, sand, dust, you name it, it's sat in this car and you can see the moss starting to grow in all sorts of areas. So this one is going to be a test of the new Snowfoam at a strong dilution and just see exactly what it can do against ground and dirt. Just one final thing to point out, that in each one of the following tests, the product was applied dry to a vehicle and rinsed off. There's no other pre-washes, APCs or anything else used. This is purely this Snowfoam being applied dry and rinsed off the vehicle, and you'll see the results at the end. So as mentioned, this is it being applied to a vehicle which is maintained but with the Garage Therapy system, if you will. And the solution was made up at a ratio of 50ml to a total 1 litre solution. Now obviously if you're maintaining your own vehicle, you don't need a full 1 litre lance every time you wash it. I know some people get away with using either 200 or 300ml solution to wash the car, which is absolutely fine, but even if you're making up a 500ml solution, this would mean you're only having to use 25ml of product. And you can see here that even at this dilution, it does produce a nice, consistent, even foam. And of course remember that it's always important to produce the Instagram shots. So what about dwell time at the lower dilution? Well, this is after roughly about 5 minutes. It was quite early in the morning, but it's still particularly warm. This was in the middle of our heat wave, so even at this time of the morning it was 18-19 degrees. And even after the 5 minutes, it hadn't showed any signs of starting to dry in. But I thought, it's time to get it off, it's probably done its job by now. And in terms of removal, as you can see here, it comes off very easily. Leaves no residue whatsoever on the car. And as you'll see in a couple of minutes, leaves absolutely zero residue on the driveway as well. That's one of the things that I found most impressive about this, was how little product there actually was left on the drive. I mentioned earlier in the video that some products you use could be sitting there for even up to a couple of days in cold conditions. This stuff, no. Now, the wheels weren't particularly bad, so it's not really showing much cleaning power here, but it just shows how easy it actually is even to rinse off the wheel. And finally then, as I rinse off the front of the vehicle, you'll see that this Snowfoam at this dilution ratio has had no impact on the LSP of the vehicle. And the Sigma was last applied roughly 12-13 weeks before this video, I think. So it is due a top up, which you may notice as I rinse off the bonnet. But what protection is there certainly hasn't been impacted by this Snowfoam. So you can see again here as I clean the rear end that there's absolutely no issues removing this from the car, and you aren't left with that avalanche of snow foam on the ground at the end when you're finished either. So if you look at the ground here, you see exactly what I mean. You can literally go around here with a microfiber cloth and pick up the foam that's left. And as for cleaning power, well, you can see looking at the car, it's absolutely spotless. Yes, it's still going to get a contact wash and a Sigma top up, but I think it looks pretty good. So onwards to the next test then. So on to the A-Class then, and the first thing I wanted to look at was just how much effect the foam could have on that wheel. As you can see, or you may be able to guess, it's had a recent tyre change, been grubby handprints from the tyre fitters all over it, and even the sidewalls are absolutely plastered in bead cream and whatever other lubricants the tyre fitters used. So this time using the Karcher K2 just to see if the application's any different. So I've applied it all over the wheel, left it to dwell for 5 minutes, and now we'll rinse it off and take a look and see what effect it's had. And as you can see, for a Snowfoam, it's done a fairly decent job in removing some of the brake dust. Is the wheel spotlessly clean? No, of course not. This is a Snowfoam at the end of the day. It's not a dedicated wheel cleaner. It's not going to remove all the brake dust and contaminants from the wheel. There's obviously you need specialist products to do that. But in terms of, as I mentioned earlier with the first test, if you wanted to just give the car a quick once over, say you had to go somewhere and you only maybe had 10-15 minutes, you wanted to cover the car in something, get it rinsed off, first impressions are that this would do a good job. So a couple of quick before and after shots here, and we'll move on with the rest of the car. So as I mentioned previously, I'm using my 7-year-old Karcher K2 for this particular test, and I'm also using a 7-year-old Snowfoam lance, this one being the Pro Clean one that you can buy on Amazon for I think maybe £15 or £20. And really my only reason for carrying out this particular test was just to see how it would be applied using maybe older and not just as expensive equipment. Now as you can see straight away as it's being applied, as with the previous test with the K2, there's a lot more air in it again, but what you do notice is that after those initial few seconds it calms down and it still does form a pretty uniform blanket over the car. So in reality, whilst it may look a bit different, it shouldn't really be affected by this at all because the surface contact area is still there, the chemical's still doing its job, it's not affected by what machine applied it. The problem with the earlier test was there was just too much air in it and it wouldn't have been making good contact with the surface. So again, as with all the previous tests, leave it for 5 minutes to dwell and then rinse it off. You will notice on the vertical panels here that the product has pretty much already gone, but one thing to note there is it was considerably warmer by this stage. We're up to maybe low 20s. Now the car is in the shade, but the air temperature was still pretty hot, so that may have had some effect on that. What I would also note, however, in relation to that, is that the product may have actually fallen off the vehicle, but the panels haven't dried in. Or should I say, the product hasn't dried in. Although I do think it's fairly common knowledge by this stage that we don't typically use Snowfoams or any sort of pre-wash product or shampoo product in these sort of temperatures and leave it dwelling on the car for more than sort of 5-6 minutes anyway. But this does, however, tie in with something I've mentioned in previous videos, that the user experience is definitely improved when you use better equipment. And just on the subject of equipment, it is very important to look after your equipment. When you're using a camera on the tripod, remember to ensure that your hose isn't trapped around one of the legs, otherwise stuff like this can happen. Thankfully no harm done other than a broken tripod leg, but that's easily repaired. So camera's still intact, we can get back to the job in hand, and as you can see here, the cleaning part is still there even when using the K2. The foam has loosened the overwhelming majority of the dirt in the car, and it's easily rinsed away, and once again, practically no residue left on the driveway. So we'll finish rinsing this one off and we'll move on to test number 3. So finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. This is where we really get to test the cleaning power of this stuff. So knowing that I was dealing with a car that had absolutely no protection on it, had at least 12 to 18 months worth of ground on dirt and moss and stuff just embedded into the bodywork, I wanted to see how much can you actually remove with just a Snowfoam. Now, this was the first time I used it at this dilution ratio, and the first thing that struck me was it didn't actually come out as thick as I was expecting it to. I was expecting a pure marshmallow style foam, again one of those that's just going to sit on the driveway for a month and a half. But no, it came on, it was obviously a bit thicker than using it at 1%, but not massively, not a huge difference that way. So we'll speed up a bit of footage, we'll see what the dwell time's like with it, and we'll rinse it off and see exactly how much dirt it has loosened and removed. And one of the first things that struck me, and I actually contacted Maz straight away to make him aware, was you could see the dirt being drawn from the tyres. Now I've used a lot of Snowfoams and a lot of very strong dilutions before, and I've never seen any of them actually pull dirt from a tyre. I thought that was a very interesting observation. So what about the bodywork itself? Well, clearly even using it at the higher concentration hasn't made it any more difficult to remove. It's coming off with the same amount of ease, and it's bringing all the dirt with it. Now obviously from the car sitting so long, there are going to be stains on there which aren't going to be removed by any sort of pre-wash product or even a contact wash. Expectations always have to be realistic for the type of product you're using, but for the majority of what was on this car, given how long it had been on, as you'll see over the next couple of minutes with these shots, I'm very impressed by how much of it was taken off. But enough waffling from me, I'll maybe stop talking for a few minutes and just let you see the dirt actually coming off the car. So as we look at the before and after pictures here, just a reminder again that this is a car which has sat for the best part of a year and a half without moving or without being washed, and this has been a purely contactless process. No other chemicals have been used, and there's been no contact with the vehicle with any media, be that a brush, mitt, whatever. To be honest, I don't think I really need to say much more. They do say a picture says 1,000 words, and I think the results actually speak for themselves here. So we'll let the video roll with a few more before and after shots, and then we'll come back and summarise how I feel about this product so far. So there we are then, you've had an exclusive look at the most recent part of the development journey of Garage Therapy's new Snowfoam. Now the version you've seen in the second half of this video may not be the final version, there will be a few tweaks and things to come. But what I can say and will say is that if that version is anything to go by, this is going to be one of the most powerful and most concentrated Snowfoams that I personally have ever used. It ticks so many boxes for me. One, as part of the Garage Therapy cleaning system when I used it on the A6. It did a fantastic job of cleaning that car without impacting the LSP in any way, even at such a low dilution ratio. Number two, on the flip end of that scale, is if you have a really neglected, filthy car with ground and dirt that you think you're going to have to start using strong chemicals or had a couple of hits of a pre-wash before you remove most of the dirt. No, I went in once with this at 3% PIR and it did an absolutely fantastic job of cleaning that car. I was very, very impressed. And finally, another couple of observations I think are worth noting. One being how little residue this left on the driveway. I mentioned a few times during the video, but it left practically nothing behind. It's not one of those products you're going to come out 3 hours after washing the car and have to walk through an avalanche of snow just to get into the thing. And the other point I was going to make, which does kind of tie in with that, is the ease with which I was able to rinse this product off. You weren't having to go over it 3 or 4 times, it was just worked my way from bottom to top and it came off with absolutely no issues whatsoever. But anyway, I think I've taken up enough of people's time. I just want to say a big thank you to, first of all, Maz and Roger from Garage Therapy for including me in this and respecting my opinion enough to ask me to get involved. It shows that clearly my channel must be going in the right direction. And secondly, I'd like to thank yourselves for watching and subscribing, and don't forget, if you haven't done so already, please do press the subscribe button. The channel can't exist if people don't watch it, and it really does make a huge difference going forward. In the meantime, thank you very much and I hope to see you on the next video.